What if one supplement could make your entire immune system smarter? Not stronger, in an aggressive way, smarter. That's exactly what BWH 85 beta-glucan from BWH Labs does. It works with your immune system, helping it recognize threats, respond effectively, and protect you the way nature intended. BWH Labs has spent over 25 years perfecting the purest, most biologically active beta-glucan on the market, an 85% pure formula that's been tested against 200 competitors and named the most effective immune modulator in peer-reviewed research. The science speaks for itself, just one ingredient, one focus. Unmatched results. Doctors and integrative health practitioners trust BWH 85 beta-glucan, and so do I. It's available in 100 milligrams for daily support or 500 milligrams for maximum immune defense. It's only available through health practitioners, but as an intelligent medicine listener, it's available to you through my full script dispensary. Just go to drhoffman.com/BWH for more information and to order. That's drhoffman.com/BWH. Because a smarter immune system starts with one smart choice. Welcome to today's Intelligent Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ronald Hoffman. Today, I'm very pleased to and very much looking forward to a conversation with one of our previous guests, and our guest reminds me that I've interviewed him 8 and 12 years ago, and it is high time for an update because he is an integrative naturopathic gastroenterologist. We're going to find out what that means, how that is differentiated from an MD gastroenterologist. There's a lot of overlap. Mark Davis is someone who is a pioneer in the field of FMT, fecal microbial transplant. And we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about other issues related to diet and issues related to supplementation and issues related to novel approaches to the treatment of gastrointestinal disorders. Judging from my conversation with him in the past, he's really at the tip of the spear in terms of innovation. And we're not talking about, over the bleeding edge of innovation. He's very science-based in his approaches while maintaining a very, very creative approach to gastrointestinal disorders. So without further ado, here's Mark Davis. Mark, it's a pleasure having you back on Intelligent Medicine. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and chatting with you.
Yes, we always have great conversations, as I recall. So first of all, your initials are ND, as a naturopathic doctor, but also you're an FABNG.
Yeah.
What in the heck is an FA? I think I know, but you can clarify.
So I'm a fellow of the American Board of Naturopathic Gastroenterology. And 14 years ago, maybe, I was one of the co-founders of the Gastroenterology Association of Naturopathic Physicians. And I'm still involved with it to various degrees, but a group that I was not involved with developed a fellowship process that involves practicing for at least 5 years, some residency stuff, some case submissions, and then a supervised exam. And if you go through all that, then you are granted that title of Fellow of the American Board of Naturopathic Gastroenterology. And I was one of the first cohort to get that about 5 or 6 years ago.
And that is a rather rare breed still, is it not? There may be a few dozen of you, a few score of you, perhaps, throughout the country.
A few dozen of us. There's not a lot of us. It's my favorite conference of the year every year is the Naturopathic Gastroenterology Conference. This year it's in Seattle in September. And it's really a group of people that has developed a culture of wanting to stretch the boundaries to find the best for every patient and also being deeply in love with research. And that combination of people just appeals to me so much. And so I look forward to that conference and that community every year.
And it is academically rigorous because your training now, training for modern NDs is very rigorous. You study pharmacology and there's a med school type education, but the emphasis is a little bit, while understanding conventional therapies, more towards applying natural approaches to health problems.
Yeah, we're a big tent. I just got back from the AANP, our big national convention last weekend, where I spoke on fecal transplant and other things. And there's all the way from one end, some naturopathic doctors practice using a lot of pharmaceuticals and a lot of conventional diagnoses. And all the way at the other end, there's docs. I have a good friend in Baltimore who's never prescribed a pharmaceutical in 25 years of practice. Some docs do minor surgery, some never do that in practice. I've done almost 2,000 fecal transplants. Most naturopathic doctors have never even done one. So big tent with a lot of diverse experiences in the profession.
And by the way, these are not illicit DIY transplants. These are rigorous, done under IRBs, institutional research protocols, right? That are
Well, so the way that FDA has given guidelines around fecal transplant is really weird and complicated and not like other substances. So in late 2022, early 2023, they granted FDA approval for two companies to make the first FDA approved fecal transplant products. One is enemas, it's called Rebiota, and the other is capsules, it's called Voust. And so those products have been on the market for a while, but FDA always carved out an exception for clinicians to be able to prepare and administer FMT for patients with C. diff infections not responding to standard therapies.
right. That's the conventional pathway. Is that officially recognized one condition? You can do it for that, but it's the off-label applications are for other conditions, and quite plausibly, but they haven't achieved the direct FDA approval. Correct?
Exactly. And so I've never worked with IRB isn't the route for FMT, but I am the chair of the research committee for the Gastro ANP, and I'm a clinical investigator in 3 IRB approved trials right now. So research is the thing I'm very interested in, and we have. Can I tell you a little bit about them?
Please, yeah, go.
Yeah. So we're just trying to establish sort of a baseline of what can NDs accomplish for various GI conditions. So one is just a whole practice study of naturopathic medicine for IBS, where people with that diagnosis see a naturopathic
Irritable
doctor.
bowel syndrome,
Irritable bowel syndrome.
gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea,
Exactly.
spasm, pain.
Yep. Yeah. And we get a baseline register of what their symptoms are, and then we check in again 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months later, just to see how their outcomes are and how that compares to if you see other types of different providers. So it's very, very investigatory, just getting a baseline to build further research off of. And then there's another one, same exact trial protocol, but for adults with active ulcerative colitis, which is a lot of patients that I see. Will I see someone with IBS if they walk in my door? Sure. But ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, inflammatory bowel disease, that's really the patient population I serve the most. So I'm particularly excited about that one. And then our third, and those are at clinicaltrials.gov. And our third one is an interesting one. Integrative medical doctors, naturopathic doctors, acupuncturists in some states have a big interest in looking at people's fecal microbiomes. I've done that type of testing for 15 years. I'm sure you ordered them.
Stool testing, yeah.
Stool testing, yep. Looking at what microbes are in there at what relative abundances. And there's a lot of different technologies to do it. You can look through a microscope to see what sort of parasites, for example, are in there, or fungi with some stains. You can use something called PCR. You can use something called whole genome sequencing. And there are other techniques. And there's a lot of...
And it's kind of come a long way from the old days when they used to just take a smear and put it on a Petri dish and see what grows. They have more precise techniques to analyze this vast, vast diversity of organisms that inhabit the gut.
Well, that is exactly the question, is how precise are they? And I don't want to bog your listeners down with the details of sensitivity and specificity, but essentially, anytime you turn up the volume to be able to sense a type of organism especially well, to make sure you don't miss it, you kind of end up with a bit of a risk of false positives, and vice versa. So that's true for testing conventional medicine. It's true for testing integrative medicine.
And another limitation of these, by the way, is that what comes out in the poop and that stays in the sample that gets transmitted to a lab, via, FedEx or, UPS, may not represent what lives in an oxygen poor environment way up in your intestinal tract. So you're getting a proxy for what's going on in your gut.
Yeah, the map is not the terrain, but it does tell us something
Clues.
about what's in there compared to different people, clues. And in conventional gastroenterology, they tend to say that we don't do that kind of testing. We're not sure how consistent it is. If is one lab consistent all the time? Are the labs consistent between each other? They're not standardized in the way that types of tests using conventional gastroenterology are. And so that is the third IRB approved trial that I'm working on right now. Essentially, we're going to take a single human poop and we're going to test 15 or 20 different lab companies
Hmm.
with 3 samples for each lab. And we're sending them each in under a different name.
Blinded, right?
Exactly
Yeah.
blinded, yeah. And first, we're homogenizing the actual piece of poop, which is what is done in similar trials that have been done previously. And we're going to see, are each of the 3 samples that we send to one lab, do they look just the same as each other? That would be intra-lab consistency. And then we're going to compare all of the labs to each other and
In other
say,
words, if the same lab identifies basically the same sample with different profiles, like something's not right.
something's not right. Yeah. And I'm hopeful, for the sake of the people who run these companies, that none of the labs have results where we send 3 samples and they look like they're from 3 different people, because that would not speak
Yeah.
pretty well to that lab. And then there's inter-lab consistency, where we say, okay, we're doing
Hmm.
these 15 labs. Do 14 of them look the same and one looks different?
Yeah.
Well, maybe that one we have to pay attention to how they're reporting the results.
Yeah.
So that's the third trial I'm working on, and I'm excited to release some preliminary results this year.
I think that that'll be a real service to consumers to help them better understand the benefits and potentially the limitations of some of
Yeah.
these tests. So okay, so for give our listeners a primer on FMT, okay, because we've heard of poop pills, doesn't sound too appetizing. What's the science behind that?
Yeah. Okay. So FMT, the full name is fecal microbiota transplantation, but most people just call them fecal transplants. Quick history. First time this was ever done and written about and recorded was about 1700 years ago in China.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's been used in the Chinese medicine tradition and Korean medicine and that part of the world consistently, although not a lot since then.
Hmm.
And the first time in modern times and in Western medicine that was recorded was in 1958 in Colorado. There was a epidemic of infectious diarrhea. Now we call it C. diff colitis going
Oh,
around. At the
okay.
time, they didn't really have a name for it.
And for
And
listening,
people were,
just back up there a second. Let's double click on C. difficile. What, why is it so amenable to FMT? What is it?
awesome question. Okay. So before I talk about that, I just want to make sure everybody understands what we're doing when we say we're doing fecal microbiota transplantation or fecal transplant is we are taking poop from a healthy person, and
Hmm.
poop is 2/3 bacteria by dry weight. We're taking the poop of a very, very carefully screened healthy person, and we're filtering it and we're centrifuging it and we're putting it inside capsules or we're putting it in an enema and we're administering it to somebody who's sick, in part because they're missing the right kind of microbes or they have too many bad
Hmm.
microbes or a combination. So that's the basics of the
Hmm.
process.
So how,
And when I
by the way,
talk,
how is this different than taking, probiotic?
well, it's similar in a way that it's live bacteria that are having a benefit
Hmm.
because of what they do when they're alive. And the difference is that when you take probiotics, you're taking maybe 5 or 10 species of microbes, and they all have to tolerate oxygen if they're going to be alive in the refrigerator in the probiotics section at your local health food store. With FMT, it is hundreds of
Hmm.
species per sample, maybe high hundreds, low thousands of strains, depending on how you want to break it down. And you get microbes that have never, ever been used in a probiotic.
Okay.
They're not oxygen tolerant. So basically, we collect the stool sample from the donor, process it ideally within 6 hours before oxygen's really had a time to kill off the oxygen sensitive microbes, process it, immediately freeze it in a medical freezer, and then its metabolism is very much slowed down, and then it's taken frozen. So that's the difference. Is you're
Right.
getting well, and I will sometimes use very high dose probiotics, like for my patients with ulcerative colitis. I'll use like 2 trillion a day, trillion with a T. That's exceptionally high and costs hundreds of dollars a month, but sometimes for my UC patients, it's worth it. But with FMT, we're routinely using billions to tens of billions in a day. So you're
And
getting
you're
more.
getting what is associated with a healthy gut, precisely the diversity and a very hard to replicate admixture of things that would be hard to find in, I don't know, yogurt or natto or, kimchi.
And that's totally true. Yeah, there's so like bifidobacteria, those are a healthy probiotic. Those are originally found in breast milk or the guts of infants who were consuming breast milk. So though that is a native colon bacterium, bifidobacterium. Lactobacillus, that's basically a food bacterium that can hang out in our gut and it causes benefits, but it's not that much of a native gut resident. Sometimes it moves in, sometimes it doesn't. So these are all native gut flora that are living in the gut of a healthy person and can establish a new healthy ecosystem in the gut of the sick person.
Okay, folks, at this point, let's pause and allow one of our sponsors an opportunity to share an important message with you. So here goes. Please listen up. You know that feeling. You're exhausted, but your brain just won't quit. You're staring at the ceiling, watching the clock, dreading the morning. Here's something that actually helps. It's called Kyolic Specialty Series Sleep Mushrooms Plus. And it's unlike anything you've tried before. This isn't some chemical sleep aid that leaves you foggy and dragging the next day. This is a clean botanical formula built around certified organic reishi mushrooms grown on real farms, not in a lab, combined with valerian root to help you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer, L-theanine to quiet that racing mind, and Kyolic Age Garlic Extract, one of the most trusted wellness ingredients available for circulation and stress support. It's vegan, non-GMO, no gluten, no dairy, no artificial anything. Just 2 capsules, 2 hours before bed, and you wake up actually rested, not groggy, not out of it, just refreshed. Kyolic Sleep Mushrooms Plus from Wakanaga. Learn more about this and the entire Kyolic Mushrooms Plus line at kyolic.com. That's KYOLIC.com. Look for Kyolic at natural health stores nationwide and online. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting our sponsors. They are what make intelligent medicine a continuing free resource to you. And now back to today's guest, Integrative Gastroenterologist Mark Davis, ND. So they screen the people for disease. You don't want to transmit, God forbid, hepatitis or, transmissible diseases. But they also screen for other criteria. They don't want a donor who's obese, I understand, right?
Yes, that's correct. So all donors have to have certain pass certain blood tests and stool tests, and then certain health history criteria and physical exam criteria. And one of those is body mass index. So somebody who is overweight or underweight is not eligible to be a donor. If someone with a history of any autoimmune disease at all is not eligible to be a donor. Somebody with any mood disorder, like a generalized anxiety disorder or a major depressive disorder, is not eligible. And I thought that was just integrative clinicians and naturopathic doctors that said, oh, what happens in your gut can really affect your mood and your brain. But those criteria were come up with by an international group of almost entirely conventional medical doctors.
Incidentally, one of my patients went and got it. Actually, she had to go out of the country to get it. She got it offshore in England under a research protocol for a severe gastrointestinal malady, which was associated with chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. She was really messed up. She tried everything, and she said, I'm finally going to get the poop pill. And she got it, and she came back, and she was transformed. And she said, not only are my physical symptoms alleviated, but I must have gotten a poop pill from a very happy donor because my mood is really transformed. It was amazing.
Well, yeah, there have actually been a number of published trials using fecal transplant for people with major depressive disorders. And fascinatingly, the benefit seems to be statistically more beneficial than SSRIs, like Prozac. You get a higher efficacy with fecal transplant than with Prozac. but it seems like it doesn't last forever when you do FMT.
Well,
I mean, it doesn't with
that there,
SSRIs either, but
so it
you can
is
redose.
accurate to say that SSRIs aren't worth S. We could say that. Okay. Okay. Well, let's keep going.
Yeah. So FMT has benefit to about 6 months, and then the decrease in depression starts to reverse, and a person's depression starts to
Mhm.
come back. But
Okay.
yeah, I've seen, and I've got a funny story. I had a patient who was doing DIY FMT.
Oh,
Um,
that's a little iffy. Hit or miss.
yeah. Um, we have scant literature. There was a paper, Silverberg et al., at the beginning of FMT that compared home FMT using properly screened donors to clinically prepared FMT and found similar safety and efficacy. And so I have worked with, I mean, I've been doing this 15 years. I have worked with hundreds of people who've done this at home. It's oftentimes very expensive, or you have to travel to England or other places depending on what your condition is. And so you do have to be very careful and make sure you're using a scrupulously cleaned or screened donor, rather. But if you are doing that, the literature that we do have does seem to indicate that you can get equivalent safety and efficacy to clinically prepared FMT. So sometimes I compare it to harm reduction, and I say, man, I'm not sure I don't want my patients doing heroin, but if they
Yeah.
are, I want them using clean needles. And some of my patients, they're just going to do FMT with
Yeah.
their spouse or their kid or their parent or whatever. And so I want to make sure that they're doing it in the safest, most efficacious way possible. And I've generally seen good results with that.
Okay. So that's doable. So, so we mentioned C. difficile. C. difficile is a condition very amenable to that. It's authorized, but why is it only one condition authorized? And I guess it's because it's so refractory to even antibiotics. There's so much antibiotic resistance. In that condition, people really waste away. They have wasting diarrhea. They can die from the condition. It is akin to colitis because it creates a great deal of inflammation, you know, bleeding craters within the sigmoid colon, from what I understand. And it's devastating. And it actually is triggered often by antibiotic overuse, right?
Yeah, that's right. So one of the reasons it's so hard to treat is C. diff. It used to be called Clostridium difficile. Now it's technically Clostridioides difficile, but only nerds need to know that. But that whole group of microbes, they're spore formers. So when they're around oxygen, they are not reproducing, they're not producing toxins, they're just hanging out protected in a little ball. They're a spore. And so when people encounter them, if they have a robust gut microbiome where healthy microbes are transforming primary bile acids from your liver into secondary bile acids, well, it goes through your small intestine and there's oxygen in there, so they stay in spore form. And then in the large intestine, there's little to no oxygen, and they come out of spore form where there's secondary bile acids there, which are inhibiting them from going into that vegetative toxin producing form. So they really can't have much action or produce much toxin, and they pass out no problem. So healthy people might be exposed to C. diff spores regularly or semi-regularly, pass them through with no problem. As much as 20 or 30% of infants have C. diff, but we don't build the receptors for the toxins on our gut cells until we're 1 or 2 years old.
Oh,
So
interesting.
it doesn't even hurt them.
Hmm.
But for somebody who has an unhealthy, dysbiotic gut microbiome that's not transforming primary bile acids to secondary bile acids, once C. diff gets into the colon, it can have a field day and reproduce and produce two toxins. They call them toxin A and toxin B that can be so harmful. They can cause bleeding. They can cause a pseudomembrane. They can cause mucus, and they can cause
They
diarrhea so
also have
bad.
referred to it as pseudomembranous colitis. Right. I remember
Exactly
that.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. And it can be so bad it can put you into kidney failure and kill you. And in fact, to this day, still kills more people in the United States every year than HIV/AIDS does, for example. So it's pretty significant. And a fecal transplant is really so. When I trained, people used metronidazole for it, which worked okay. And an
Flagell.
even better therapy, Flagyl, exactly. An even better therapy is vancomycin. And
Hmm.
now they invented even one more called Difficid or fidaxomicin. And all of them do okay at curing it, but then it often comes back, maybe a quarter to half the time, depending on which antibiotic you use and what your history is. Um, but if you give fecal transplant, about a 90%
Wow.
durable cure. So I tell my patients with C. diff colitis, which I've treated many of, it's like you have a C. diff shaped hole in your microbiome. And the antibiotics just dig that hole out even more so it can come back if you're exposed to it. But giving fecal transplant fills in that hole, and then you're really not
It,
susceptible
it
to it.
doesn't kill the C. diff. It just kind of outcompetes it or
That's
something like that.
correct.
Yeah.
That's totally correct.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. So, what other conditions are, you mentioned mood disorders. How about other neurological conditions? Because we now have information that the microbiomes of people with Parkinson's disease, for example, are quite different. It's actually, you can predict the risk of Parkinson's disease years before the clinical symptoms emerge based on a stool profile.
That's quite correct. Yeah, it looks like maybe about 6 years before symptoms begin, you can find changes in the typical person with Parkinson's. Um, so there actually have been several randomized controlled trials and even meta-analyses of fecal transplant for Parkinson's, some of which were released over the past couple of months.
Hmm.
And I will say the evidence is mixed. It's
Okay.
mixed. We have some trials with positive results, some trials with negative results. We're trying to figure that out through meta-analysis. My guess with Parkinson's is that there are a subset of patients who will benefit, not everybody, and we have a lot of work to figure out what that subset is and do trials where really our inclusion criteria just include those ones who are going to benefit so we
It
can
may be
see a
multifaceted causes, or
yeah,
some people, or certainly we know chemical exposure is a risk factor, genetics, and so on.
yeah.
So on another front, I just pulled a paper which I wanted to talk to our audience about, and you'll understand this. So you can break down the science for our listeners. Elevated microbially derived metabolites in autism, a possible diagnostic screening test for a distinct autism spectrum disorder phenotype. Now, we harken back to this guy named Dr. Andrew Wakefield, who was a physician who, I guess it was in the 90s, who demonstrated that the the microbial community in the gut of kids with autism was different. And he ultimately was defrocked. He wasn't defrocked because he was wrong. Of course, what he suggested seemed like a firestorm because it kind of went counter to the view that autism is just highly genetically determined and, it has nothing to do with the gut. But he cut some corners in his research, and ultimately he lost his medical license. He was, as they say in UK, stricken, delisted, whatever. But ultimately, there was some inherent wisdom in that, right? And is there some research looking at the application of these therapies to developmental disorders?
There is. And I know Andrew Wakefield wrote a book, which I haven't read, and I've heard people tell me that I would maybe change my mind about him if I read the book. But I had read that part of the reason he was stricken is that he accepts some large payments from a
Yeah,
group of parents who were maybe planning to sue some vaccine
yeah.
manufacturers. And so that was kind of the ethical area
So
in which he,
unethical
yeah,
things, and
yeah.
conflicts of interest.
Yeah,
Right.
but the study you mentioned is by a group in Arizona. I think it's Jim Adams is one of the author, and they are
Yeah.
at
James Adams.
University of Arizona, and they actually collaborated with Sonoran University of Health Sciences, where I teach the Naturopathic Gastroenterology course, and they've done two. I think they've published two clinical trials, and they're working on a third and a fourth. And the first one was looking at kids with autism spectrum disorders and also GI disorders. Could be anything. Could be functional constipation. Could be IBS. Could be any sort of GI disorders. And they sort of separated them into two groups. One of which got an initial big dose of FMT orally. The other got a big dose of FMT rectally. And then they followed on with months. I think it was about 3 months of low dose FMT every day. And what they saw was robust and statistically significant improvements in GI conditions, a wide swath of
Of
GI
which
conditions and quality of
many of
life.
these kids have severe GI problems. They
Many.
can't even
Yes, many.
express it sometimes, but they're in distress because of signals coming
Sure.
from their gut.
Yep. Yep. But they also showed uh, that neurodevelopmental aspects of these kids' pathology was significantly changing as well. And so they did an initial study, which was maybe they got their final results at 3 months or 6 months, I'm not remembering. And then they did a follow up 2 years later that found that actually, compared to, I mentioned for depression, seems like the benefit starts to wane at about 6 months. For these kids in this study with autism and GI problems, at 2 years afterwards, those who got benefit had even more enhanced benefit at that time in
Wow.
terms of neurodevelopmental changes and GI changes as well. So that's very exciting. They're either running or maybe have published one for adults that I've talked with Dr. Adams about, and he says they're getting good results, and they're working on yet another trial as well. And in fact, they are. I'm not involved with them in any way, but they're looking for investors to try to get their FMT product approved for kids with autism as an orphan drug by the FDA. So they're
And
trying to
that
do
would
that.
make it more accessible and less, perhaps a little, it seems a little exotic, and especially with kids,
Yeah,
unsavory perhaps to do fecal transplants, maybe a little radical. So to standardize it and create a FDA approval pathway for a standardized therapy, I think would really be a step forward. And of course, there's the application to obesity, because we know from animal models that if you transfer poop from a fat rat to a skinny rat, the skinny rat will suddenly pack on weight.
yeah.
And I think vice versa to some extent.
For
So
rats, yes, but
in
it
rodents,
look
but is it
in
applicable
rodents,
to
yeah.
humans? So you wrote
It
about that
looks,
in, a few years back in your,
yeah,
yeah.
that's correct. And it looks like for the most part, no. You can make fat rats skinny and skinny rats fat by giving them
Yeah.
fecal transplant. Side note, you can give rodents poop from alcoholic people, and those rodents will start choosing alcohol over water.
Ooh,
Yeah,
wow.
and vice versa also.
Yeah.
But when I've tried to do that with humans. There have been a number of clinical trials right now.
Hmm.
Basically, you can't make fat humans skinny by giving them skinny human poop.
Darn.
Humans are more complicated than rats,
Right.
but it doesn't work with one little carve out, which is for people with obesity and insulin resistance, especially adolescents with insulins. There is a statistically significant weight loss along with that statistically significant drop in insulin resistance. So that's the only subgroup that has a response. It's not as robust of a
Yeah.
response as with like GLP-1 drugs or
Right.
something like
Yeah. I don't
that.
think Lily's going to pick that up because,
Probably not.
right. They're doing pretty well with their lineup of GLP-1 drugs.
Yeah.
Okay, great stuff. So I'm going to stipulate that we're going to leave poop behind for part two. And in part two, we're going to talk about some other approaches to gastrointestinal maladies. We'll talk about diet. We'll talk about some natural compounds and supplements, among which are, I think I'd like to touch upon Saccharomyces, maybe talk a little bit about novel probiotics like Mutaflor and indigo, which is what they make blue jeans with. During my practice, I explored the use of indigo, and I think that there's something to it, and a variety of other modalities that can help people with gastrointestinal disorders. We're talking to an expert, an integrative gastroenterologist. He's actually a naturopathic physician who has a fellowship in gastroenterology. Even within the naturopathic profession, there are naturopathic specialists, naturopathic cardiologists, naturopathic neurologists, naturopathic
Oncologists.
oncologists, yeah, which we've interviewed, Lise Alschuler among them. And so, yeah, great stuff. Stay tuned because we got more to share with you in part two with Dr. Mark Davis. Mark, you got a website, which is logically enough, Mark Davis, N as in Nancy, ND, markdavisnd.net is the place to go. And he's got some fascinating articles there. All right. When we return, more on the subject of integrative gastroenterology. I'm Dr. Ronald Hoffman, and this is the Intelligent Medicine Podcast.